Vigilance and Medical Affairs before setting up SJ Solutions. SJ Solutions services span both consulting and contracting to provide solutions to drug safety, research, and other affairs related to the running of a business within the pharmaceuticals industry. SEMA has helped companies implementing the new EU legislation and is currently studying for her MSc in epidemiology. SEMA, over to you.
Hi, can you hear me okay? Okay, great. So I'm not talking to myself. Michelle is in as me, but it looks like I'm talking to myself in the chat. But you can hear me okay. Great. So I'm on the computer headphones. I hope it works okay, and I hope the sound's okay because the computer headphones aren't great. Right, so apologies for that. As I was saying, we're going to talk about GBP Module 6, which is the collection, management, submission of reports of suspected adverse reactions to medicinal products. Give an overview, and there are some updates based on Eudravigilance and access to Eudravigilance and those changes. Now, this is one of the longest modules, so I have tried to be as succinct as possible. So as I was saying, we've had the revision 2 that came into place the 22nd of November last year, and we've had ICSR management updated based on Eudravigilance upgrade, also some information on patients, reporters, identifiability, some clarification there. Looking at medical literature and how to manage access to those products that are managed by the EMA for medical monitoring, collection of patients' age, electronic submission, of course, through to Eudravigilance, post-authorization efficacy studies, and emerging safety issues. So benefits of the new system really are that Eudravigilance is now the single point of submission for all cases, and that's both for national competent authorities and MAHs as well. And really, that should assist in ensuring some consistency with the same rules across the European Economic Area within a harmonized format. So it really should help to standardize that reporting process and theoretically make it easier. We've also moved from E2B revision 2 to revision 3, and the Eudravigilance upgrade was in relation to that as well. And again, that should make it easier to manage your cases and processing of those cases through to Eudravigilance. So just to start on unsolicited reports, as we know, I mean, those of us who are involved in case processing will know spontaneous reports, it's where you don't have information coming from a systematic collection of cases. Here you've got causality that's assumed in some way. And there's mention here of primary source, which had been mentioned previously, person reporting the facts about a case, healthcare professional or consumer, and of course the definitions are per ICH E2D, where medically qualified person is your healthcare professional and your consumer is anyone that does not meet the healthcare professional categorization. Now, when we look at E2B R3, the primary source for regulatory purposes is a new field here, and it's a new data element, and it is the person who first reports the facts in the report or in the case. Now, where you have multiple primary sources from different countries, this data element will be used to define the country that makes up the worldwide unique case identification number. So it is important from that perspective. Also, though, and it's important because that's exactly where the cases, it drives kind of the case reporting through from Eudravigilance through right to the correct national competent authority. So you could have a situation, though, where you have a patient that has a patient that has actually experienced an adverse reaction in another country compared to the reporter who's reporting the reaction. In that case, the primary reporter will stay the same. However, you need to capture the country, though, in the relevant field, and that is the identification of the country where the reaction or event occurred. And then again, that can ensure that the routing of that case is appropriate and goes to the appropriate national competent authority. Looking at seriousness, I haven't put the seriousness criteria here, those are well known, but if any of the events or the reactions within the case are considered serious, then this needs to be documented at case level, and that's to ensure then, again, that the right timeframes are met with regards to reporting criteria. And of course, we do have the IME list that will facilitate consistency in making that decision for seriousness assessments. So if we look at seriousness and causality and downgrading, so consumer causality shouldn't be downgraded based on healthcare professional follow-up. So if you have a consumer report and then the healthcare professional thinks that actually it's not causally related to taking that product, you would not change the causality and you would add both of those opinions to the narrative to make it very clear that there are differing opinions. And of course, if you have a primary source causality, that shouldn't be downgraded either if you get further information with regards to the case. And that is also from an internal perspective, that if within the company you feel that the case is not related to the product and you have a justification for that, you would add that in, but you wouldn't downgrade and say it's not causally related. You wouldn't downgrade as well on the seriousness perspective if there's disagreement with reporter. So again, it's complete visibility, justification, adding in where there are those differences, but not changing exactly what's reported and making sure you take the most approach. So I think, Ramya, you've written that seriousness is assessed at event level as well. However, for reporting, you would do case level, because if one event is serious, the whole case would be serious. And that's what I'm referring to. So if we look at validation now, we know what the 4 criteria: reporter, patient, suspect drug, suspect reaction. If we look at the reporter here, they've given a bit more clarification with regards to validation. You have to have your sufficient evidence of the existence of somebody there, and that is per ICH E2D, and that's where you would use your qualifications. So, for example, a doctor reported name, initials, address, email, phone, something like that. But where you feel that you've got enough evidence that there's an existence of somebody there who's reporting the event. Now, within ICH E2B revision 3, you need the country of at least one reporter as well. So for validity, for electronic reporting, you would need both the identifier and country. So if you have information on qualification that's missing, then that would be considered as a consumer case. And if the country's missing, then you would use the country where the notification has been received or where the review has occurred to ensure that validity. It's important that we collect contact details so we can get follow-up information. That is absolutely essential to ensure that you can either validate invalid cases or get relevant information as well from a medical assessment perspective. And also, it's important that you collect as much information as you can on all parties, all people that are reporting that case information, because that will help with duplicate reporting and identifying duplicate reports, because you may have one case reported by one party and the same case reported by another party that's within Eudravigilance. And if you can collect that information, you can then see that actually it's the same case and it's not 2 cases. Looking at patient now and validation here. So here you need to have one single identifiable patient with at least one of the qualifying descriptors. So here we've got initials, medical, number, date of birth, etc., gender. And if you don't have that and you cannot distinguish, then that will be a summary case. So for example, if you had 10 patients compared to saying 10 male patients, then the 10 patients doesn't have that descriptor. That would be summary, whereas the 10 male patients would be 10 individual patients. You have to have your suspected medicinal product, and if you have an interacting product, that should also be suspected as well, and a suspected adverse reaction. So you can, if the reporter states that they don't think that the event is related to the product and you agree as the MAH, then you can say that you don't have a suspected adverse reaction because there's no causality there. But you both have to agree. And if you have an outcome only, for example, hospitalization, and there's no event, so it says patient was hospitalized, you don't actually have a suspected adverse reaction there because it's an outcome. There's no actual event, and that wouldn't be considered a suspected adverse reaction, a valid report. What you should though always use medical judgment in that situation, because there may be situations where, say for example, there's a fatal outcome. It could say, for example, sudden death. You would want to report that. So, you know, there has to be a degree of assessment there to make sure that you're reporting things in the right way. You should record your invalid cases in the pharmacovigilance system, so you need a mechanism for that. Most companies will use their pharmacovigilance database. And sorry, I've got a couple of questions coming through here. So if the reporter mentions a patient, should we consider it as valid? So my understanding from Module 6 is no, that shouldn't be valid because you don't have the qualifying descriptors. And would you create 10 cases if you received a report saying 10 male patients? So in that case, again, previously, that's what we would have done. And my understanding is yes. So I hope that's answered your questions, Manoj, Sleep and Louise. So thanks, right. Okay, so coming on to recording of invalid cases, you do have to make sure there's a system, and normally you'd use the safety database. You would go and follow those cases up to try and validate those cases so they could then be reported as appropriate. If we look at timeframes for reporting, so this is where it's changed slightly in the sense that, I mean, this is the same. We've had 15 calendar days always for your serious valid cases, and that includes those from outside the EU. Your 90 calendar days, though, for your non-serious cases weren't in every national competent authority, but now, of course, that comes into force, and you are meant to submit your non-serious valid cases, but not including those from outside the European Union. Now, there may be situations where the timeline can be revised, and this could be in the case of a public health emergency through either World Health Organization or the EU, and you could have an amendment then to your regular submissions. However, that will be notified on the agency website. So looking at literature reports now, so one of the changes was the introduction of literature monitoring by the EMA. And as we know, we're meant to look at our literature reports weekly to identify any cases from the literature with regards to our products. So if your product's not on the EMA list, then you would look at your reference databases containing the largest number of articles in relation to your product. So really something that will give you the broadest possible way of getting all of your cases and being able to identify all of the cases associated with your product. If your product's on the EMA list, you need to make sure you have a mechanism of exporting those cases to your database, the ones that have been identified by the EMA. Now, for all products, though, you are meant to monitor local journals, so whether or not it's on the list, it doesn't matter. So your local literature needs to be monitored for your products where appropriate. It's important, though, that the articles that are picked are those that are considered causally related. So not where you have an article where you have a whole host of concomitant medications listed, but actually the whole article is about an event associated with another drug. Previously, that did used to happen. Nowadays, of course, there's been more guidance with regards to that. So it has to be really where the author has considered that there is a causal relationship, or is insinuating that by the way that the article has been written. So I've got a couple of questions here. So Ramya, you've said, should special situations be submitted to Eudravigilance? Not necessarily, and I'll come on to that in a minute. And I'll go through the different special situations and what should be submitted. And that should hopefully answer that question. Are non-literature summary cases valid? No, they're not valid because you don't have those unique kind of identifiers. That's why. And Furiel, you asked me to go back to clarify the last but one bullet point on validation. Suspected, okay, so this is where you have an outcome. I'm assuming that's what you're referring to. So you have an outcome, you get a report where someone says the patient was hospitalized, but it doesn't say what they were hospitalized for. So that shouldn't be a valid case. But you could have someone saying had a fatal event. That may not be a valid case either, but you need to use medical judgment always with regards to that. I hope that's answered your question. Okay. So literature reports. So looking at E2B revision 3, they don't actually have literature case as a source. So the only sources that are available are spontaneous, report from study, or other. And you would need to choose spontaneous, and then you would also need to then put in the reference within the case so that it's clear that it's a literature case there. Okay, for some reason this slide hasn't loaded. I'm not quite sure why. So here I will go through the slide and we'll send you the slide separately to those that are on the call. The sources are regulatory reports. So before you would probably receive them from the National Competent Authority in some instances. Now you would need to go to Eudravigilance and obtain them and extract your cases from there, because the National Competent Authority will be sending all cases to Eudravigilance. Of course, you have the lay press, media, those are considered spontaneous sources as well. Internet, digital media, and here the marketing authorization holder needs to screen regularly any of those sites that are under their management and responsibility, so those that are owned, paid, or controlled. And reporter ID gives you the possible verification, again, that a person is reporting, the real person is reporting that event there or available for reporting, and that should be an email address in a valid format. Class action lawsuits are also covered, and often in these cases you'll get a large number of cases that will come through, and it can be very difficult to manage the timelines and to stay compliant in that situation. So here, if you have large batches, you can request an exemption for submission, and this can change from 15 to 30 days for your serious cases, but your non-serious cases remain at 90 days, and you'd make that request through to the agency's pharmacovigilance department. Okay, so a couple of other areas: the suspected transmission via medicinal product of an infectious agent. So this would be serious. And you do need to consider the whole supply chain, the communication, to make sure that every kind of relevant person in that chain has been informed appropriately and communicated to appropriately. You may also need to look at the hemovigilance procedures as well, if this has been derived from human blood or plasma. For your counterfeit medicinal products or your falsified medicinal products, this again more of an area of concern lately. And if you have an ADR that's related to confirmed falsified medicinal products, you would submit a case, but you should also consider whether you need to do anything else as well. So if there is an issue from a counterfeit perspective, do you need to recall that batch? Is the batch defective? Does something else need to be done on top of that? So it's not just about the case reporting, but considering what else you need to put into place. So looking at special situations, so Manoj, saying, please can I repeat the detail regarding serious case submission deadline? Did you mean with regards to the lawsuits or just generally? So your serious case submission deadline is 15 days. If you have a class action lawsuit, you can ask for an extension because you've got a large number of cases to process, and you can ask for an extension, and that will change it to 30 days. I hope that's the question that you're asking there. If not, just type in. If we look at special situations, and hopefully, Ramya, this will answer some of your questions. Pregnancy is one, so this is maternal and paternal exposure. You should take half-life into consideration because you could have a drug with a long half-life, in which case product may have been stopped, yet there may still be. So how do we ask for extension? So you ask for an extension through the agency's pharmacovigilance department, and there'll be an email that you would go to for that. So you have to take into consideration exposure. If you have a product with a long half-life, then it may be that you stop the drug, but actually because you've got a long half-life, exposure may still have occurred at conception. Follow-up is extremely important. Normally, you would follow up at the time of receiving the report come through, at term, so when the baby's born, and then after that, based on what you think the effect may be, as in the time frame that you would follow up thereafter, to look for any abnormal outcomes with regards to the pregnancy and also the child and the neonate. Usually you should use a structured questionnaire, standard questionnaire, it just makes it easier. And if you have an abnormal outcome that's serious, you should report according to your 15 days. So that would be things like congenital abnormalities, fetal death and spontaneous abortion, and any reaction that's in the neonate that's considered serious and meets that seriousness criteria. So you wouldn't, though, submit just a pregnancy exposure without outcome data, termination of pregnancy, but with no data on congenital abnormality. So you can't say that there's a congenital abnormality there and that's why the termination occurred. Reports with a normal outcome either, you wouldn't submit these, but you do need to collect them and you do need to review and assess and discuss within the PSUR if as relevant. There are certain situations, though, where you may submit exposure during pregnancy, and that's where you're perhaps trying to get more information with regards to those exposures. So that could be for a product like isotretinoin, which we know is teratogenic, and of course there's a pregnancy prevention program in place, and you may need to expedite or report those within a standard time frame or within the 15-day time frame as agreed with the regulatory authority. So if we look at other special situations, pediatric, elderly population, so this is where the age and clarifying age comes into play, and it's important that you make reasonable attempts to confirm the age because you want to see if there's anything occurring in a specific population. You do need to then know the age. Nope. Okay, you do need to then know the age to be, hopefully you can still hear me. I just got a message, but I think it's an old message saying you can't hear me. Okay, I think you can. So important to understand the age range so you can put into context exactly what you're seeing from a reaction perspective. And there is a guideline coming out or a product population specific consultation, and that's due in 2018. Thanks, Rachel. So looking at overdose, abuse, misuse, medication error, occupational exposure, and I think these were, again, the special situations that we were talking about. There are clear definitions within the module as to what should go under these different settings. Now, if there's no associated reaction, then these aren't submitted as a case. Okay, you wouldn't submit it as a case, but you do need to record these situations and they need to be considered as part of your signal detection, part of your PSUR, because it may be that there's an issue, a safety issue that comes out from this that then needs to be dealt with, that potentially could have an impact on your risk-benefit balance and then needs to be dealt with accordingly. You need to follow up as well to get the information and make sure that it's as complete as possible so you can make that judgment call. And medication error special guidance is available. There are two guidances available on the EMA website. One is an overall kind of giving you that conceptual of what medication errors are about and where you should be collecting that information. And the second one is about coding so that, again, you can pull out the right information to be able to assess that appropriately. So, Priyal, you said, I thought that PACE elderly does not fall under special situations. Sorry, you're right, that's special population that I'm talking about there, and the heading's probably slightly incorrect there. So thanks for that. Okay, lack of therapy, lack of therapeutic efficacy or lack of efficacy. So same as before. You should collect, record, and follow up. And there are certain situations where you may require 15-day reporting. So that's where your medicinal product is used in a critical or life-threatening condition, but not if the lack of efficacy is associated with disease progression, in which case you wouldn't report that, but you would in the first instance. Of course, you've got the public health importance aspects, the vaccines, the contraceptives, and there you would have 15-day reporting as well. You wouldn't have that reporting in the context of a non-interventional post-authorization efficacy study because the main endpoint is efficacy there, so you wouldn't report through that. And it is important to understand exactly what's being reported to you to think about whether that needs to be reported on or not as a valid case. So if you have a lack of efficacy with an antibiotic that's being used in a life-threatening infection, but that antibiotic should not be used for that infection, then you wouldn't report that. But if that lack of effect was due to resistance and that antibiotic should be used in that situation, you would report that. So you do always have to bear in mind the scenario that you're looking at and make that judgment call overall. Okay, moving on to the next slide. So off-label is another area of a lot of concern. Want to get as much information as possible to see how your product is used in the real-life setting. And off-label really is anything where the product's not used as per the approved label. So it could be indication, it could be your population that's being treated, administration, method or route, posology, the dosing. And you could have an adverse drug reaction associated with this, or it could be that it doesn't result in harm at all. In either case, though, you need to look at whether this is an inherent issue. Is there a safety concern associated with this use, in which case you may then need to do something further, even if there's no valid case there. Again, you have to document the case and evaluate appropriately. So follow-up information, extremely important that this is captured because you do need follow-up information to be able to make that medical judgment appropriately for the case, understand exactly what's going on. If you have new information, it should be clearly identifiable in the case narrative section and distinguishable from the initial information, so you can see what new information has been reported. There are situations where you may have a differing seriousness criteria, and if you have, for example, a non-serious case to start with and your follow-up is serious, then you would report your follow-up as within the serious timeframes. If you have an initial serious case and the follow-up is non-serious, that's the same as well. You would still report that as non-serious. You wouldn't, though, submit non-significant information that doesn't affect the medical evaluation. So things like your typos or where you've had a change in your MEDRA coding because there's been a version change, you wouldn't then submit that. Also, with E2B R3, there is the ability to submit an amendment to a case, which wasn't always possible in the sense that the dates were incorrect with E2B R2. So what could often happen is that there would be an amendment to a case because of maybe an internal evaluation. However, the date of receipt would stay the same, and it could look like that actually you were non-compliant with your timeframes. That has been amended with R3, and you are able to do that now and submit an amendment without worrying about then showing non-compliant timeframes. Okay, moving on. I know there are a few questions there. Oh, right. Can you hear me now? Okay, I'm back now. My speaker just moved from my mouth a bit. Where did you lose me? Okay, I'll just carry on. So looking at solicited reports now, so this is where you have some way of collecting the information. You're going out, getting that information, and it's not being spontaneously reported to you. So because you're going out there and finding that information, you need to do a causality assessment to say whether this is associated with taking your drug or not, and they're classified as study reports. Now you can have interventional studies, non-interventional studies, and depending on whether it's interventional or non-interventional, that will depend on what legislation you use for reporting. Now, Module 6 refers obviously to 2001-83 and the non-interventional side. And if you have an interventional study, that will be through the Clinical Trial Directive, which is 2001-20, and follow the reporting guidelines as per that. So with non-interventional studies, so this is both post-authorization safety studies and efficacy studies, but non-interventional. All the events are collected unless there's a justification for not collecting certain events that are detailed within the protocol. Reporting time frame is the same as it would be for spontaneous, so 15 days for your serious and 90 days for your non-serious related cases. All adverse events are summarized as well in the study reports. Now, there may be a situation where in the protocol you state that actually some events don't need to be collected by the healthcare professional or the patient, and you may receive that coming through the healthcare professional. If it's detailed within the protocol that you don't need to collect that, but you have that reported to you, those cases should be managed as spontaneous reports and not clinical study reports. Now, for non-interventional efficacy study, the reporting is the same as the safety studies, and that's new, or that's been added in, I should say. For secondary data, now you can have a non-interventional safety study that focuses on secondary data. What I was talking about before were primary data collection, so that's where you set up a survey, you might set up a different type of study, a cohort study, something like that. You know, that's where you do need to proactively report. If you have a secondary data study where you're looking at electronic healthcare records or going through charts, you're looking back retrospectively, you don't need to submit cases from that, but you would summarize all of your adverse events in the interim safety analysis or the final study report, unless you stated something different within your protocol. So if we look at emerging safety issues, so this was in Module 6, and this relates to anything that may have a major impact on the risk-benefit balance of the product, where you need urgent attention or you need communication with patients and healthcare professionals. And this has actually been moved to Module 9, which is signal detection, which is probably a more relevant place for this to be. A little bit on data management now. So, of course, with the changes to the confidentiality data protection laws that are coming in, it's important that those are adhered to appropriately from a confidentiality perspective, and also when you're transmitting information between different stakeholders. So where you have a marketing authorization holder transmitting between each other, or even with national competent authorities, you need to ensure that you take into consideration the local national data protection laws. You need to ensure that within your process that access to the database and to documents is through authorized people only, and that's the whole data path, and ensure that that integrity is maintained. And also that from a data integrity perspective, looking at data transfer, that's security, and there's non-corruption of data as well during that transfer, either within the organization or to external parties too. If you have transfer of data between or within companies, there needs to be reconciliation. So that's where medical information reconciliation usually is in place, as well as partner company, to make sure that you've received all of the information relating to safety data cases appropriately. When you do receive the data and you're entering into the database, it needs to be treated in an unbiased and unfiltered way. You need to really not make any judgment call, well, not judgment calls, or inferences. We've got here an imputation. So really, you should be putting onto the database a factual representation of what has been reported. And even if something doesn't make sense, it still needs to be entered in that way, because that is the way it has been reported. You could later on within the company comment make a comment, but anything within the case itself should be presented as it has been presented to you. It's important also that there's an audit trail for the whole data process, and that includes entry right through to transmission. Duplicate case checking is again extremely important to make sure that you're not getting a number of different cases that are relating to the same case, because that can skew things, especially when it comes to signal detection. So you need to have a process for that. Apologies, I think I've just missed a slide here. So quality management. So of course important, QMS is important from a PV perspective as always, and you need to look at compliance at each stage of case management process, from collection, validation, data entry, and reporting to the authorities as well. Making sure that you're using the correct terminologies, coding is appropriate, make sure that whatever you put onto the database is what has been reported to you, so validating that to make sure that you're not making those inferences along the way. And usually this is done by audits of the process. Your SOPs need to be in place for the whole data pathway and also for now accessing and extracting information from Eudravigilance. For example, now you'll need to add on the regulatory reports and be able to access those. Staff need to be appropriately trained in not just the legislation and guidelines, but also in the procedures as well. And you need to make sure that whoever is performing those data entry tasks are aware of the standards and terminology, and that proficiency is tested, how to code properly, and you need to show that they know how to code properly, because coding is so important to be able to pull out the right information from your database. Training also extends to other personnel who could receive cases or adverse events, so that includes your medical information people, representatives, but generally all companies will train everybody within the company to recognize an adverse event and report it to the PV department. Now, if we look at a couple of situations between submission of your marketing authorization application and approval, you need to submit information that could have an impact on risk-benefit balance, and that's to the member state where the application is being assessed. And if you have your product available in a third country during that assessment, you need to submit cases from outside the EU. If you look at when you suspended or have a suspension of a license or revocation or withdrawal, then you need to, again, there continue to collect adverse drug reactions and submit as before for a suspension, and it is encouraged to report those when you have a revocation or withdrawal of an authorization, and that's so that you can look at any delayed onset reactions or retrospectively notified cases and pick up any safety issues that may have occurred. So looking at reporting to Eudravigilance now, so in the post-marketing setting, all cases submitted to Eudravigilance now, not to national competence authorities within the EU or the EEA. 15 days for serious, 90 days for non-serious, and access from a marketing authorization holder perspective depends on the data that you're looking at. You basically have full access to the data that you send. Partially restricted access to cases that are sent by another organization that are for the same active, under the same active ingredient, and your level of access will depend on whether you've applied for a level 2A or level 2B, and just the difference there are just different data fields that you get additional data fields within level 2B compared to level 2A, and everything else is level 1. You do have to register your organization and individuals with Eudravigilance, and individuals you need to state exactly what access you're requesting for them. So looking at reporting to Eudravigilance, transmission will depend on whether you have a compliant gateway within the company and whether you have an E2B compliant safety database as well. So if you have both a compliant gateway and database, you'll use the gateway trader. If you have a compliant database only, you'll use the post-function trader. And if you don't have either, you'll use EV Web Trader. Now, for solicited cases, your submission will depend on what type of study it is, whether it's an interventional or non-interventional, and exactly how that event or reaction has been reported to you. So if you have a post-authorization safety study, non-interventional, and or a post-authorization efficacy study, then that would be classified as a report from studies and reported to EV post-marketing. For those that aren't within the protocol of either of those post-authorization safety study or efficacy study and reported to you separately, then that would be a spontaneous report to EV post-marketing. If you, though, have an interventional clinical trial, then you would report to the CT, the clinical trial module there. So Manoj has said, please confirm if we need to continue reporting Germany MLM cases. That I'm not sure. Manoj, I'll have to come back to you on that one. Can I come back to you on that one? Okay, so in summary, we have had changes to reporting now directly to Eudravigilance with your 15 days, 90 days for your serious and non-serious respectively. We've moved from E2B R2 to R3, which hopefully will give something a little bit more manageable with regards to the cases and make it more fit for purpose than before. We have got new data elements to consider, such as your primary reporter and ensuring that the validation aspects are maintained there. We've had clarification on other aspects of validation, and hopefully it will lead to a smoother process overall. So just to read out here. So Ramya said you don't have to report anything to BFARM, and Madhu said, Manoj, if the reporter mentions as a patient, we should consider it as valid. Seema, what was your answer to this? Oh, my answer was no. From my reading of Module 6, we would not consider that valid because it does not have the appropriate identifiers. And then Ferial, you've said no more reporting to the NCAs now, just to EVPM CT. Yes, that's right. Ferial. And apologies because I believe I was cutting out, but hopefully you can hear me now. Okay, are there any questions? Sorry, I know that was a little bit of had a few technical issues there. I'm not sure how much you could hear, but please let me know if you've got any questions. Okay, I think it looks like we may not. Oh no, Mother, you're typing. Can you please elaborate on obligations of MAH after submission? So when you say after submission, do you mean, can you clarify what you mean, Madhu, with that? You mean submission of case or marketing authorization application? Okay, MA application. So what you need to do is you would need to monitor for any changes to your risk-benefit balance for your product. And if you have your product licensed in a third country outside of the EU, then you would need to report cases from there. Is that okay? Okay, great. Any other questions? Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much.